inviting me to be here. When Jill told me that I'd be doing Jill Reisler told me I'd be doing a presentation in Minnesota in January, I thought, I don't know if I have clothes for that kind of weather. I'm from Western North Carolina, and we don't really get a lot of we don't. I mean, this weather here is like cold for me, and you guys are just sitting there going, you have no sympathy for me at all, right? I have been a dietitian for about 25 years, and my background includes being a dietitian officer in the U.S. Army. I worked in public health, but most of my time as a dietitian has been in the retail or supermarket world. So I work for a supermarket chain that's based out in Western North Carolina. I'm on the editorial review board for the soy nutrition newsletter called Soy Connection. I'm an independent expert for GMO Answers, which just means I don't get paid. I just say things and write things without getting paid. And I'm a founder of a group called Build Up Dietitians. So one of the things that I like to, when I'm talking to groups that aren't dietitians, which is quite often, one of the things I like to explain is what a dietitian does. We'll leave Wanda out of this because she knows, but how many of you have ever interacted with a dietitian or met with a dietitian, know a dietitian, have a dietitian in the family, stalk someone on social media like Wanda? Anybody? Okay. So you all, however, how many of you know an animal nutritionist? All right, there you go. So we have a lot in common. Animal nutrition and human nutrition, of course, have a lot in common. When I did my undergrad at University of Maryland in College Park, for a lot of the undergrad classes, I was in the same classes with people who went on to become animal nutritionists. And then we go the human nutrition path, and they go the animal nutrition path. So a registered dietitian typically has an undergraduate degree in human nutrition. Then we have to apply for an internship. I did my internship with the Army. And during the internship, it's a little bit like any kind of medical internship where you have competency areas that you have to complete. So it's 1,200 hours. You do clinical, you do administrative, you do public health, you do counseling, and then after that, you have to take a nationally administered board exam, which is about 4 hours. You have to pass it. And then you have to keep up continuing education credits for the rest of your career as a dietitian. So the big difference between what I do, or what dietitians do, and what an animal nutritionist would do is we strictly deal with a free-range population. And while your animal nutritionists are going to change their animals' nutrition and feed throughout a life cycle, dietitians do the same thing. But our patients only have a lot of options, while an animal has a very limited amount of options, mostly. A lot of people ask me, what's a dietitian doing talking about agriculture? Like, why are you in this space? And that's a really good question, because I haven't always been in this space. And I think in some ways, while social media is to blame for a lot of problems right now, it really was the accelerator or the catalyst for making me realize I needed to learn more about agriculture and farming, because it's not something we as dietitians are typically taught in school. It's changing a little bit now. So probably about 9 or 10 years ago, I started to get a lot of questions from customers about how their food was being grown and raised. And I realized I couldn't answer their questions because I didn't know. I had been to the typical farm tours, local organic farms, small-time growers, people who had farm stands, but I had really never visited any large-scale farms. So I started doing this almost like a pilgrimage for a couple of years. That's how I refer to it recently, where I just started making a list of all the different types of farms I wanted to visit, and I started reaching out to people. And because I was a supermarket dietitian, it was a little easier for me because I could ask our buyers, I could contact people, and they're usually very receptive to having somebody with a supermarket visit. So you can see here, you probably recognize one of those images. This is one of Smithfield's farms. It's Sal Farrow operation in eastern North Carolina near Tar Heel, which is, of course, their biggest facility, I guess, in the United States. And so I did the whole Smithfield tour a few years ago. I guess it's probably been 4 years ago now. The woman up in the corner there is Cassandra Benfield, and her father had an ornamental tree farm, and during the recession, nobody was buying ornamentals, so she started growing produce. And she is there are not a whole lot of female farmers in western North Carolina, but she's one of them. Down in the corner there, that's Randy Gardner. He is kind of like the Justin Bieber of plant researchers in the tomato world. He is famous for developing varieties of tomatoes that withstand a lot of the diseases we get in western North Carolina, like the types of blight we get. And then in the last little corner there, that's Bart Ramsey. I almost said Nathan Ramsey. Bart Ramsey. And Bart is from a multi-generational dairy farm in western North Carolina. It's beautiful land in western North Carolina. And I guess he's milking a couple hundred Holsteins, as you see there. So these are just a few of probably 50 or 60 different farms I started visiting and writing about and sharing with the customers through radio, through TV, through articles, through one-on-one conversations, what I was learning about agriculture and how their food was being grown or raised. And it helped me a lot, too. As I got into the whole space of social media, and Wanda can certainly sympathize with this, what I realized that many times when customers would call me with concerns about food, and I would ask them, well, where did you hear that, or where did you see that information? And it got to be, it's pretty predictable. On Facebook. Somebody shared it on Facebook. I saw it on Twitter. Somebody posted it on Instagram. And I started thinking about this concept of the Alice in the room. So I'm going to tell you a little story about Alice. So when I lived in Washington, D.C., about 25 years ago, it was, of course, very expensive to live there, and I'm sure it's even more expensive now. And I shared a house with two women. One was Jane and one was Alice. And Alice was very petite. She's about 4'11", up here. She worked at the Library of Congress. She's a very smart person. But one of the most remarkable things about Alice was her voice. She had this really, for a small person, she had this really loud, piercing voice. And one time are you named Alice? I feel bad. Is that right? One time I asked her exactly, I said, why is it that, you have a really loud voice? I probably said it in a very kind of nice way, hopefully. And she said, well, I grew up with grandparents that were very hard of hearing. So that, she kind of overcompensated for that. But when we go out to parties with Alice, no matter where you were in a room or who you were talking to, you could be on the other side of the room, you could be talking one-on-one with someone, or be in a group of people talking, you could hear Alice's voice across the room. That's how loud she was. Even though she was this small person, even though she was only one person, her voice was heard over everyone else's in the room. So when I was thinking about this whole situation about listening to customers and what conversations are we hearing, what voices are we hearing, I started thinking about Alice. And are we always hearing what the real customer, what the real consumer is saying, or are we hearing the loudest voice, the Alice in the room? And thanks to social media, Alice and people like her can be one person. It can be somebody who has very few followers, but because social media has given them this amazing platform and this amazing ability to amplify their messages, there are a lot of Alices in the room that don't have any education, don't have any training, probably have never even been to a farm, but unfortunately they're able to mobilize other people and they're able to affect changes at an amazing level across the food system. And we've already seen a lot of examples of that, from cage-free eggs being instituted in fast food chains to glyphosate being banned in certain communities. So we can't not take the Alice in the Room seriously, but we also have to kind of put it in context with the whole conversation around food and food systems. So what are some hot topics right now? Well, these are kind of a no-brainer, right? Non-GMO, GMO, plant-based. I would say these, and I could probably put up a list of maybe a dozen more topics that are hot, but I wanted to just pick a couple and kind of do a deeper dive into them and see what the conversation is and how is reflected in the cart, or is it reflected in the cart? And by the cart, I mean the shopping cart. Do you call it a buggy here or a cart? Buggy? Cart. Okay. All right, good. Just checking. All right, so here is an example of a loud voice in the room. This is from Twitter, passionately organic. And you can see that she's put up a quote from David Suzuki. And I think I remember at the time when I saw this, I looked back to see how many followers this person had. Did not have a whole lot of followers, but hashtag organic, no to GMOs. And this is the type of message that frequently gets retweeted and shared repeatedly by people sympathetic to this kind of message. How many of you have ever taken a syringe filled with a blue liquid and inoculated your corn in the field? Nobody, right? We know that's not how GMOs and gene editing is done. But these types of images resonate with customers because they're scary. Fear sells. Fear motivates people. Fear is a really powerful motivator. And many people are afraid of things like images like a syringe. So we can't really talk about GMOs without talking about organic. And this is a statement from Dan Glickman from back when, there was a time when we didn't have the USDA organic symbol, which I guess was like 1999, maybe even earlier than, right about then. But Dan Glickman made this statement back when they started the USDA organic symbol, which is part of the Agricultural Marketing Service, to remind people that that symbol is never meant to imply nutritional superiority or any kind of quality. It's a marketing symbol. But despite that, and despite knowing what organic means, all of these things, what do you think consumers feel the same way about what that symbol means? No. So I can tell you, and I'm sure you can say, similar situations where consumers think that organic means it's safer, means it's pesticide or chemical free. I hear that a lot. That it's lower in calories. I'm not sure how that works. That it's gluten free. I have actually heard people say that. I think it's because that when they see G for GMO, they think that non-GMO means no gluten. I'm just telling you what people say. That it's grown locally, not realizing that there's a lot of organic products that are grown all over the world. That it's somehow more nutritious or healthier. Well, let's look at what is actually in the cart in terms of organic. I mean, as much as you hear about organic, you would think that it's a huge driver in food sales, that it's a huge money maker for companies. It is not. These are figures from 2017. Organic as a percentage of total food sales was 5.5%. It did go up in 2018. I looked at the number to 5.7%, so an increase by 0.2%. So organic is, as a category for retailers, is not a huge category in terms of total food sales. One of the things we want to remind people is that there are actually not that many GMO crops in the United States. I did a little exercise with CropLife America, I guess CropLife International, where I went on the National Mall in Washington, D.C. this summer, and we did kind of this fun exercise asking people what they knew about GMOs. And one of the questions I asked was, how many GMO crops are there in the United States? I had people say hundreds, thousands. And when I would tell them, would it surprise you to learn that there's only 11? People were stunned. People were stunned. I mean, people literally thought there were thousands of GMO crops in the United States. And you can understand why, because everywhere you go, from like small mom and pop seed companies who are selling ornamental plants to plants that you plant in your backyard garden, everything is saying non-GMO, even though there's no GMO equivalent to it. My favorite one, however, is that kitty litter. Every time I do a presentation, I thank one of my friends for spotting this at Expo West Food Show and taking a picture, which I have used so many times. Yes, they actually labeled kitty litter, cat litter, non-GMO Project Verified. And if you aren't familiar with the non-GMO project, it is not a government agency. It's a pay-for-play third party that verifies products, and I'll put that in quotes, verifies products, and to the tune of probably at least $10,000. That's how much it costs to verify products. So what are people actually seeking out non-GMOs or not? And this is really interesting. And I think one of the things we want to remember when we read headlines about food is actually to take a look at the research and how they ask the questions and how the questions are presented to the survey, in the survey. Because this survey, you can see here, notice how what's in red and what's in gray. So the what's in red says, currently seek non-GMO, 23%. This is data from FMI, Food Marketing Institute. They led with this information. They led with 23% of consumers currently seek out non-GMO. That was the lead to that in their report. What they didn't lead with was 77%. The overwhelming majority do not currently seek out non-GMO. Why are they doing that? Well, it plays to the audience. It plays to fears that customers have. It plays to fears that retailers have. Ooh, we're not doing enough with non-GMO. We need to do more. Back up, hold on. It says 77% are not seeking out non-GMO. And even the numbers from previous years, it had gone down. You see that number below it there. Trying to avoid or minimize GMOs, only 41% said they were trying to avoid or minimize GMOs, and 59% didn't care. So what are the more important numbers? What are the loudest voices saying, or what are the majority of consumers really saying in that conversation? Okay, so moving on to plant-based. How many of you have ever heard of the group called Good Food Institute? I know Wanda has. No? Oh, wow. You need to find out who these people are. They're a very vocal marketing group who represents folks like Beyond Meat, Impossible Burger, and a lot of the plant-based products. And Wanda was just asking me, she's like, well, where did that term plant-based come from? That is really a marketing construct. Now, back in the early 2000s, when the China study came out by T. Colin Campbell, who is a vegan, he started using that term plant-based, and it didn't get a lot of traction. And then Michael Pollan, who's a food journalist, started using that term plant-based. And then celebrities started referring to their diets, like Beyonce, and I think even Mike Tyson. Although, even though he bit on somebody's ear, I guess he still qualified himself as plant-based. So a lot of celebrities started referring to their diets as plant-based. And Bruce Friedrich, who is I don't know if he's the president of Good Food Institute, actually came out with a quote in Cooking Light magazine. It was in probably 2016. And he advised people to get rid of the V when they talked about meat alternatives and meat substitutes, advising them not to use the word vegan, not to use the word vegetarian, but to use the term plant-based instead, because it would appeal to a larger audience. And you've seen that word plant-based has really developed kind of a health halo all of its own. So Good Food Institute is gotten better, but they're very well known for using words like they're referring to their products or the products they represent as clean meats or cruelty-free meats. That's one of the edges that they try and push. Plant-based or meat alternatives have been around for a long time. These are actually headlines from the 1920s from the New York Times. They were predicting the popularity of a synthetic steak made from cottonseed in 1925. Wow, I guess that didn't catch on back then, huh? So what is plant-based? So it really seems to depend who you ask. It doesn't seem like there's any one definition that anyone can agree on, and I have another slide to show you that. And these are 3 definitions that you can find. So it seems to run the gamut from real die-hard vegan to maybe more of a flexitarian. One time on social media, I asked, I just put it out there, I said, how would you describe plant-based? And a friend of mine sent me a picture, and it was of about a 4-ounce portion of salmon sitting on a bed of spinach and noodles. She said, here's my plant-based dinner. It's based on a plant, right? So these are possible definitions of the word plant-based. And this is a brand new slide I just got a hold of, and this is from Food Insight, which is the International Food and Information Council, IFIC. And they asked a group of people, what's your definition of plant-based? And so the responses here from people who actually knew or had a definition of plant-based. Very interesting you see here. Of course, the overwhelming majority would describe it as a vegan diet. But then you have a significant number, almost as many, so probably close to 30-some%, that say it's a diet that emphasizes minimally processed foods that come from plants with limited consumption of animal meat, eggs, and dairy. So in that definition, animal products are not off the plate. So, and what I also found really interesting about this is, look how many are not sure at all. There's more people who aren't sure than you might suspect in this kind of question. People don't have any idea even how to define it. We cannot kind of escape the fact that in many cases, the vegan customer is very much the Alice in the room, is very much the loudest voice in the room on social media. But we need to put that in perspective and really talk about what percentage of people in the United States are actually vegan. And this number really has not changed in years. Only about 0.5% of people in the United States identify themselves as vegan, and only 2 to 3.3% of people identify themselves as vegetarian. And about 59% of them admitted to eating meat within the last 24-hour period. So these aren't people who are firmly committed to that kind of diet. And we all know the gateway meat for people who want to move back to eating meat is bacon. Exactly. Here's the number that seems to be growing a little bit. 10 to 11% of people are vegetarian inclined. Some people like to call that flexitarian. I'll be honest with you, I've never had a customer call me up and identify themselves as a flexitarian. Never. I think that's another construct of like a marketing construct. I think it's people who are trying to eat more fruits and vegetables, but I've never heard anybody refer to themselves as a flexitarian. Again, just like our graph of organic foods, we're hearing so much about plant-based products, but what is really their impact on the market, and what are they in terms of total food sales? Were there only 2% of total food sales in 2018? 2%. And most of that is in fluid beverages. So your things like your soy, your almond, your coconut, your flax, your oat. So these are not a huge influence on the food market. They are, in many ways, for retailers, what we call a loss leader. You know, we have them available to people, but they are not moving nearly as much as traditional meat options. So going back to social media, because social media has had such a huge impact on the conversations in the room, we want to remember who is talking on social media? Who is making the most noise? And in order to do that, you really have to take a kind of a deeper dive into what ages are on social media and the demographics of each platform. For Instagram, those still are skewing primarily to Gen Z and millennials. So 13 to 17-year-olds, 18 to 29-year-olds are going to be your Instagram users. For Twitter, 25 to 34-year-olds are primarily using Twitter. I mean, there's always outliers like Wanda. Facebook, primarily your 25 to 34-year-olds, millennials, and Gen X. And we need to ask ourselves, where do these people live? What's their income? Do they live in cities or suburban areas or rural areas? That really shapes the conversation a lot about food. What's their income level? What kind of education do they have? Have they ever been on a farm? Do they have any connection at all to a farm? And where are some of our other generations that aren't mentioned? Where are our Gen X? Where are our boomers? And where are our silents? So your silents are your 72 and older people. They still buy groceries. They still eat. What do they think about food? What about your Gen X? What about your boomers? These people are significant financial hit and influence in the market. What do they think about food? Why are we not listening to their voices as well? Why are we only listening to a very select population and select platforms? So I feel like these people are all silent, that we're not really listening to what they're saying. And this may be why those numbers skew so differently. You know, that 77% of people who aren't as concerned about GMOs or organic, whatever your number is there, are those people in the silents, in the boomers, and in the Gen X. So those are some important things to think about when we look at the information and the questions and the conversation on social media. Okay, I just threw this slide in last night because I thought it was so interesting. So this was an article that Cami Ryan shared. Cami Ryan is with Bayer, but she shared it from the Western Producer, and it's based on data from the Canadian Center for Food Integrity. And this is how the headline read: latest trust in food data is unsettling. And I'm like, oh boy, what is that? What does that mean? Unsettling. So this is a good reminder that to read beyond the headlines, read and see what the data is and how these the marketing firms, how these information groups, how the media is shaping your perception based on what they lead with. So when I started looking at the data, I thought this was kind of interesting. Here's, like, they have these questions, like, do you agree or disagree with this question? I am personally concerned about eating food that comes from genetically engineered crops. Are you concerned or not concerned? 42% were not concerned, and that number was actually in 2017, 2018, they were concerned. 37% were concerned in 2018. So it actually improved. The number of people that were concerned lessened, right? I am personally concerned about drug residues in meat, milk, and eggs. In 2017, 46%. 2018 had gone down to 40%. So that doesn't look unsettling to me. That looks like we've made some progress, at least in Canada. I am personally concerned about its use of pesticides in crop production. Oh, I messed that one up terribly. 48% in 2017, 45% in 2018. Again, I am personally concerned about the use of hormones in farm animals. 51% in 2017, 42% in 2018. To me, this looks like somebody's done a good job getting some information out. They've made some progress. I don't think that's unsettling. I think that's kind of good news. But look at how that conversation was led and put out by the media. Like, oh no, this is bad. You're going to be upset. But when you really dig down and look at the data, it's not upsetting. I think that's really good news. What are customers and consumers looking at? Well, the top 5 things, and this has been pretty consistent for a number of years, the top 5 attributes that people look for are low sodium, low sugar, no artificial ingredients, no preservatives, and whole grain. The least important to shoppers, and again, this has been pretty consistent for a number of years, is no allergens, certified organic, gluten-free, grass-fed, and certified humane. GMO didn't even make either list. It wasn't the least important, it wasn't the most important, it was somewhere kind of in the middle of those. But does that surprise you to see what's more important to customers? Because we seem to think that relentless drumbeat that we get is it's GMOs, it's organic, it's pesticides, it's hormones, but the reality is often quite different. Top drivers of purchases for customers have been and continue to be taste and price. Taste and price. If the price is right, people will buy it. If the price isn't, they won't. If they buy it and it doesn't taste good, they'll never buy it again. They're a one and done. And below price is health. It's increasing. The concerns about health are kind of increasing, but they still don't overtake price or taste. And I just thought this was a good one to remind us, what are people looking at? The top searched recipes in Google for 2018? Hummingbird food is actually food for hummingbirds, just so you know. It's not something for people. But the number 5 item is pork chops. And what do you notice about all these products, with the exception of hummingbird? They're all comfort foods. Do you see plant-based on there? No. Do you see a recipe for quinoa on there? No. I happen to like quinoa. I have nothing against quinoa. I'm just hating on quinoa. But look, this is what customers are looking for. They're looking for familiarity. They're looking for comfort food. So we need to kind of keep our eyes on the prize and not get so distracted with these loud voices in the room, and give people what they want. They want taste. They want price. They want comfort. They want to hear from you. They want positive stories. They don't want negative rhetoric. And you can tell your story anywhere you want. It doesn't have to be, your platform can be on social media, but your platform could be with your church, with your Rotary group, with a school. Because I'll tell you that the anti-animal activists are already there. They're already going into your schools, and they're showing videos like Game Changers, What the Health, Forks Over Knives in schools. They're already in your churches. I can tell you, I don't know if it's this way in the Midwest, but there are churches that are instituting Meatless Mondays, that are telling people to avoid GMOs, that are telling people to only buy organics. That's becoming a part of the church dialogue with parishioners. And that's a lot of times shaped by animal activism and a vegan agenda. You don't need to throw anybody under the bus when you tell your story. We get plenty of negative rhetoric all day long thanks to the media. Tell your story and tell it in a positive way. Remember that the taste and the price are the most important drivers for people. Focus on those things. We can meet around the plate. There's a room on the plate for everybody. And people want choices and options, and we really need to respect that. That's my last point. The first one is you need to recognize when people define themselves or talk about something, whether it's plant-based or organic or non-GMO, take the time to dig a little bit deeper and don't just make an assumption. Just because somebody says they're plant-based, don't assume that they're vegan. That may not be the case at all. It may be just like that friend of mine who puts a piece of meat on a bed of plants or on a salad, and she considers herself plant-based. So take the time to ask some questions and dig a little deeper. Resist labeling customers. Resist using negatives. Don't call it fake meat. Don't. Just stop. That's not helping. Don't talk about ingredients and products as chemicals. Not helping. Because the more you employ negative rhetoric, the more I see and customers see you being defensive, and they take that as a sign that you have something to hide, and they don't like it. Research the why behind the buy. Why are people buying certain products? I mean, I think it's really fascinating. Are they buying it, are they looking for certain products because of religious reasons, because they have concerns about animal treatment, they have concerns about hormones, they have concerns about pesticides? Maybe if you can find out the why behind the buy, it would give you an opportunity to tell your own story and provide some information and education if people are receptive to it. And of course, the most important thing is respect your customers. They want choices. I can tell you that if you try and take away people's choices, they get very upset. We're seeing that, you know, I don't know if you saw, there was a Bloomberg article about Starbucks, and it said ditching dairy. Starbucks is ditching dairy. Well, that's not really the total story, right? There's a little bit more to it than that. But the pushback on Starbucks was immediate and swift, that people were very, very upset with Starbucks. I'm never going to a Starbucks again. I'll never buy Starbucks again. So it works both ways. So you have to be very careful to let people, to respect choice and to honor the fact that in the United States, people want choice and they expect choice, and if you try and take that away from them, they're going to be more upset with you. There's room on the plate for everybody. There's room at the table for everybody. We just have to meet in a positive way. Here's my contact information in case you want to get in touch with me. I'm as Wanda said, I'm on Twitter as Leah McGrath RD. The global social media presence that I have is Build Up RDNs. We say global because I run that with 7 other dietitians, including dietitians in the UK and Spain. And there's my email, builduprdns@gmail.com. Do I have some questions from anybody? Yes. Oh, good.
Regarding GMOs, and I think you could choose that and also plant-based. In discussions with individuals that fear or that select for or will not consume GMO products, what's their fear?
Yeah, you know, you hear a lot of different things. You hear like I hear things like, there are no long-term studies, we don't know the long-term effect on it. We do. I mean, there's scientific consensus about that. You hear that it's the cause for increased allergies. It's not. There's no proof of that either. You hear, sometimes I hear things about like, it's destroying the food system, it's, am I doing something? Oh, sorry. Oh, okay. It's destroying the food system. It's resulting in monocrops and weed resistance. You know, there's a little bit of truth to some of that. So I think when people say that, you again, you have to dig a little deeper and find out, you know, what are your concerns, and try and find some sort of common ground with them. Like when people talk about, I had an email recently from a customer, and she said, I want to find out what products that you sell in your store are GMOs. Whoa, we have a lot. And because I don't want to shop there if you guys sell GMOs. Whoa, you know, and you start to think through all the products that are the result of things like corn or soy, and it's not just food items. You're talking about non-food items like packaging come from a lot of those products. So what I started out, instead of trying to school her, educate her, I said, well, let's start from a point of like benefit of GMOs. My husband has type 1 diabetes. He takes insulin every day. Insulin is a GMO. Without insulin, he wouldn't be alive. So I'm pretty thankful for genetic engineering. And I think that, you know, coming down the pipeline, some of the things that we're seeing with GMOs, drought resistance or different kinds of resistance to pests and diseases are going to be a real benefit to people. And we're not going to be in a position to take those out of the equation. We need those types of products. We need that type of technology. I think that gene editing it's a different thing, and I think it's positioned itself a little bit better with a little less pushback from people so far. Overall, I think the conversation about GMOs online anyway on social media has really lost a lot of steam. Do you feel that way too? I do. I'd say maybe a lot is an exaggeration, but I feel like that that isn't the most important issue. Now, I don't know exactly. I think probably glyphosate has really overtaken that. They've kind of segmented that out, but I don't know that people are as concerned about it, or at least as vocal about it as they were 4 or 5 years ago. So I guess in answer to your question, if somebody was to say that to me, I would try and drill down a little bit and kind of get a better understanding of what their fears were. Because usually if you can do that, if you can kind of get to the why, it might help you with how to address that, and not that you're trying to change their mind, but just to understand and find some common ground. I don't know if that answers your question. Anybody else? Yes.
You had on one slide that 84% of vegans and vegetarians return to animal products.
Yes.
Can you flesh that out a little bit? Why do they return?
Yeah. Isn't that fascinating? 84% return. There can be a variety of reasons, and it can be health reasons that they start to have vitamin and nutrient deficiencies that they can't. That their vegan diet, a strict vegan diet, is going to result in. Of course, the main one is vitamin B12, but there's also iron, calcium, vitamin D, zinc, that they may be underrepresented in a strict vegan diet, especially one that's not well planned. So they need to turn to supplements. So a lot of that data was self-reported from people, and they asked them, why did you abandon the vegan diet? Health issues, just didn't feel good, never had the energy, having to take too many supplements. So like kind of a health issue. Then there were people who said that it was too socially isolating to be vegan, to be a strict vegan. They just didn't have a lot of opportunities to go out and enjoy a social life. Now, that's changing a little bit as you have more meat alternatives on the market. And that is why if you talk to people in like Burger King with the Impossible, it's kind of like the tag-along benefit for having like the Impossible there. They're getting customers who they haven't had in the past because like there's a vegan in the family or somebody who's vegetarian and they would never go to Burger King because there was no option for them. Now they have the tag-along benefit of having an option for them. They're still not, the amount of Impossible they're selling is ridiculously low. I saw a report earlier this week and they were talking to one store. He was selling 20 Impossible burgers a day. That's like nothing. I mean, probably they're selling 20 burgers in an hour of a regular beef patty, but 20 in a day. So it's a loss leader, right? You're having it to get people in the door. So the socially isolating factor, I think there are some people who maybe just miss meat. They're like, you know what? I miss eating meat and I want to go back to eating meat. And I think there's that factor as well. I think there's also people who maybe it was an economic decision. I don't know how many of you, like when you were in college or something and you found yourself eating a lot of meatless meals because you couldn't afford it. So, or it was too hard to cook or you didn't know how to cook it. So you kind of became meatless because of it was easier not to eat meat. So, is that part of it too? That now they have more money, better cooking skills, so they're going back to eating meat. So there's not one reason. There seems to be kind of a variety of reasons that people return to eating meat products. Yeah, and Hal Herzog is a researcher at Western Carolina University, and his tagline is "Bacon is the gateway." Meat. He said there's like stories where people said, I was vegan for years, and then I came home and my mom was cooking bacon, and next thing you know, I was eating bacon and eggs for breakfast. So, anybody else? Yes.
So when you are at your supermarket speaking with consumers and someone comes up to you and they have a package of bacon and they really want you to say, well, where did this bacon come from? And how did it get here? Like if they're talking personally, I've had people ask me very kind of routine questions that you have to highlight the positive way. So if you walk into a pig facility and you're showing the average consumer things that could probably be scary to them, so what keywords and vocabulary do you use in explaining how farmers raise that bacon to get it to that grade?
Yeah, I think most consumers really don't want to know. They don't want to know that part of the process. Some do, but some would they like the fact that their meat is coming in a package and they can buy it and they don't have to think too hard about how it got there or worry about how the animals were treated or not treated. But I think that you also have to be prepared to answer those questions that customers have about standards of care that farmers have and the fact that these animals are a significant investment for farmers. I mean, it's not in their interest your interest to harm animals. It's in your interest to care for them in the best way possible and give them the best lives possible during that period of time when they're in your care and before they fulfill their obligation, duty, their role, which is to become food, right? So that is their role. What I like to do is really talk about some of the farmers that I've met and how much they care for their animals, and I've seen that, and the type of care they provide, veterinary care, type of feed, and that in order to give Americans the best quality food and the safest food supply, the sometimes extraordinary efforts farmers go through to do that. And I think that focusing on the food safety aspect is also really important to a lot of people, knowing that their food is safe and that they can buy products and not be afraid of contamination and things like that. So, I mean, I've been through the processing facilities and I've written blogs and stuff about it. I don't think that's something that most, customers want to see, but not just about hogs. They don't want to see pigs. They don't want to see animals, period. But that's a lot of times because we anthropomorphize animals, and our only connection with animals is like petting zoos. And we don't understand, most Americans don't really understand how farming happens or what takes place. And that is, in and of itself, something that animal activists really count on, that people don't understand the process. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.